Okay, welcome to tonight's meetup presentation. It's going to be a very informal type of presentation, as well as some questions and answers. And I've been speaking with Sarah offline before the presentation started recording. So I think the conversation is going to go down a very interesting pathway, particularly when we look at what's happening in our modern world in regards to human evolution and the way that people are really subscribing to the mass conscious belief that the flow of, the fear, I won't say fear mongering, but I will say that there's a level of fear that people are experiencing that, oh my God, things are going backwards. But in metaphysics, everything's always the opposite every single time. So things aren't going backwards. Things are actually evolving in a very more powerful, progressive sort of a way. So tonight's discussion is going to be about reincarnation and the way that I perceive reincarnation, but I always like to get feedback as to what other people perceive reincarnation to be. But because we've got a very small, intimate group here tonight, we're probably not going to do that necessarily. But if you wanted to just chat, just in the chat box, type in questions in there, or just raise your hand, either physically raise your hand or raise your hand on the Zoom down there. You'll see the reactions. You click on the reactions link and raise your hand, and then we'll go through the process. So what I'll do is I'll just start by sharing a couple of slides to get started. So tonight, this is one of the components of a training program that I run called Path to Your Highest Purpose. I do discuss reincarnation and I do go through my reference point to it. This is a little slide that I like to add at the beginning of my meetup presentations only, is that a conversation with a wise person is the same as 30 days in a library. And I like to add to that everyone has wisdom to share. So there's no right or wrong answers. There's no my opinion's better than yours or yours is better than mine. It's just that we have a certain frame of reference. We have a certain series of life experiences that have contributed to who we are right now in our lives. And we have something to contribute. We have something to give. We all have a genius within us that is waiting to be unleashed on the world, for us to contribute our creative genius. And the reality is, from my experience, is that most people have been disconnected from that, particularly with the evolution of social media and the internet over the last 20 years. Social media and the internet have actually isolated people from physically engaging with other people. And because when we connect physically with someone in the same space as someone else, we energetically feel them, we visually see them, we auditory hear them. There's a very strong, there's layering of engagement that's occurring between the people. But with this thing called Zoom and with this thing called the internet and social media and getting on the devices all the time, we tend to have lost some of that that spatial awareness of communicating and connecting with people. So what I do teach people to do is how they can do. I don't intentionally go about this, but it happens by default that people can actually learn how to do psychic readings and intuitive readings either over the phone or through Zoom or the internet, because I teach them a process of actually being able to feel the wave that connects with that person. And because it's an energetic field, it travels at the speed of light. Because I used to have clients in the UK where I can do readings with them by phone, and literally the electrical wire, it was like in the old days when you get those two paper cups and you put a string and you string them out and you can talk to each other. It was literally like that. It was this feeling of very strong communication. So understanding reincarnation actually enhances your ability to communicate on multiple levels and multiple layers of awareness. So what I'll do is go into, I won't talk about the Zoom slides. I'm just whipping through some slides here because everybody here tonight knows how all this works. But to go here, so basically there's 4 pathways in my training program. Tonight's pathway, we're going to be looking at the path of awareness, whereas we're going to be looking at another level of awareness about who we are as a heritage, as an individual, why we're here, what we're doing here. So in the path of awareness, we talk about having full self-awareness and self-observation and the ability to observe and interpret the world with new eyes. So when you can observe the world reincarnationally, you have a different respect, you have a different ability to see things. You begin, when you start to look at the recognition of reincarnation and that this concept of oneness that I'll talk about soon, a lot of the New Age spiritual teachers talk about this concept, this sort of nebulous concept. They don't really give nuts and bolts what they're talking about, but they'll say, when I look at you, I see parts of myself. Or when I look at you, you are a mirror to me. And I always used to be puzzled by that. I thought, what are they talking about? Like, it's so nebulous and what? But in terms of quantum mechanics that I've studied in quantum physics and also metaphysical traditions, I actually understand the fundamentals of what that means. And I'll explain some of that in this. But just to open up the conversation a little bit, the question I'd like to pose is, what does reincarnation mean to you? So if you just unmute yourself there, Sarah, and if you can, just to put you on the spot a little bit, what does reincarnation mean to you? What you've learned of your life so far?
I guess, so everyone has, I guess, what they signed up for, but then throughout their life, I guess there's karma that plays out, and then you have to get through that and work through that, which is all within, and emotions and all, and how you treat other people. But then you can bring, when you come back again, it sort of comes with you in a way, and you have to work through that. And then there's different levels. I think once you get to level 10 or something, then you don't come back. Or maybe you go to another universe or another planet. But yeah.
Nice. You've got a good grasp of, did you read the script? Because you've, in the way that I talk about reincarnation, you're very much on track. There's lots of similarities in the way that we perceive it. I'm going to pose another question to you now, to sort of stimulate your thought forms. So what would you say is the purpose of reincarnation?
I guess it comes down to, it's like the script's even bigger when you talk about it that way. I guess with the changes, I don't know too much about, so the changes in energy as well as a mass can alter the way everything flows as a collective. That could be sort of the bigger picture, but that's, yeah, it's like what's the big intention of this whole thing, this whole stage show, or yeah.
Well
Question
done.
mark.
That's well done. Yeah, that's good. You know, it's because we hear the purpose, we hear destiny, we hear, you know, we're a spiritual being having a physical experience. We hear these concepts, and it's like, what's the motivation that's behind that? You know, I always ask those sort of questions, and I feel that answers come, but sometimes the answers that come, the ego part of me, or the ego part of us, looks at it and says, oh, really? Is that all there is? You know, it's sort of, so as I go through the presentation, this will start to make sense. So what I'll do is I'll just introduce myself and as to why I can, you know, I offer this sort of information. So 35 years ago, I dropped out of university with absolutely no purpose. I then started to look for purpose. So 33 years ago, so 2 years later, I started studying personal development in the form of metaphysics. So I had three very powerful metaphysical teachers that I studied with for probably 15 years, and then other studies after that. About 24 years ago, I started a radio show and then a TV show where I interviewed hundreds of spiritual teachers and natural healers. And over that 12-year period, I learned a lot about this thing called purpose and healing energy and all these types of things. And I started to really condense them down into very consistent messages. And then I've been running my own business for the last 12, actually it's probably more than 12 years now, probably more like 16 years, but running a business is a personal development program because you have to balance everything up all of the time. One thing, you change one thing, it has a roll around effect elsewhere. And now I'm moving into the mentoring role, something that I really have been doing for, 25 years as an intuitive sort of a process. Now it's becoming more systems oriented. So there's a very deliberate and a very specific process that people can go through to reveal truths to themselves. Because a part of my mentoring process is that when I work with individuals, they're actually doing their own healing. All I'm doing is I'm giving them a mirror, a spiritual mirror, if you like, so they can look at themselves and go, oh, wow, and they make their own breakthroughs. So I'm not sprinkling fairy dust. I'm not waving the magic wand. What I'm doing is using very, very structured psychological processes, if you like, to turn blockages and emotional baggage and challenges from previous parts of this life and converting them into very powerful lessons of self-awareness to transcend that and then to go to the next highest level. So yeah, I love this stuff. It just speaks so passionately how this works. But let's start talking about the way I see reincarnation. So reincarnation for me is actually evolution. And evolution is an interesting terminology. I'll sort of talk to that in a little bit after I get through these points. But reincarnation comes from this thing called oneness or singularity, or what we on the individual level call higher self. So our higher self is intimately connected to this singularity, this oneness. And what oneness or singularity wants to do, it wants growth, it wants expansion. And it does this by gathering experiences in multiple ways. For example, this experience that we're having now is there is me, there is you, and then there is us. So there is a broader awareness. I could be talking to the Zoom camera myself and just sort of having a bit of a giggle away at myself, but it's only going to be the experience with me. Whereas a shared experience actually accelerates growth on multiple levels, particularly when the evolutionary process takes place. And the evolution, when we evolve, is when we finish our lineage of lifetimes as a human. I tend to feel that that's 10 to 12 lifetimes. You mentioned that 10 number before. I don't think any more than 13 lifetimes, because there's only so many human experiences you can have, and then we evolve off into the next plane of consciousness, whatever that was. I don't think we go from a human reincarnation to an animal human incarnation to a plant, to a human again. I think as our consciousness evolves and we become more self-aware, we want to build on that. We want to build on those foundations and build upwards and increase our frequency and increase our self-awareness. So yeah, I think I've gone off a little bit of a sidetrack there. So I'll go back to the slide and talk to that. So the next thing is lessons and choices. So I'm going to talk to those things, but let's have a look at this oneness and singularity concept firstly. There's this, we hear these sayings where it's like, I look in, when I'm looking at a fellow human, I'm actually looking at myself. I'm looking at the mirror for myself. And the way that I sort of view that perception is that because we come from the one source and we go into this thing called the higher self realm, and then from that we splinter off into a unique particle. So you and I are unique particles, is we've come from that same source. So when we speak to each other, we're actually speaking to ourselves just dimensionally in a different dimension. So we're getting a much broader whole experience of that. Now, just to go through and elaborate on this slide and the next couple of slides a little bit, is that oneness or singularity, if we view it as a sphere, not as a circle, but as a sphere, a three-dimensional sphere. It helps to deal with our mind. Now, this explanation that I'm going to give you about my understanding of reincarnation is based on the restrictions of my mind. It's based on the restrictions of the three-dimensionality of this dimension. How we can possibly explain the spiritual dimension, which is outside of time and space, we can only grasp it as a concept. We can feel it in some way, not emotionalize it, but we can feel it and intuit it and somehow know it. But to use words to express it and explain it is challenging. I think it's not impossible, but it's challenging. But when you're speaking to other individuals that have touched that next dimension through life, near-death experiences, or through doing plant medicines and doing, experimenting with psychedelics, people who have touched that dimension at some reality, they can speak to other people and discuss the nature of that reality. But if people haven't had that experience, it's hard to come up with the words. It's like, people, like I speak to my mum about this sort of thing, and she just looks at me and rolls her eyes, and she's, "Hey, Stephen, you're off on one of your little, flamboyant message." It's like, yes, Mum, I know. That's just me. And she loves me for that, and that's just the way that it is. But I just see the world differently because of my exposure to those other dimensions. So the oneness singularity is where we originally come from, and it's a unified field of consciousness that is aware of itself. It has total self-awareness. Now, in its awareness, it knows that if it is a three-dimensional sphere of consciousness, it knows that it's restricted. It knows that it can only have a singular experience. So its surface level of the sphere is exposed to the external reality and receives all of that information and interprets all of that information and slowly adds to itself and slowly grows and slowly expands. But singularity is it's full of wisdom. It knows that if it's not growing, it's going to decline. It's going to compress in on itself. So it needs to continue to gather experiences outside of time and space, but it wants to do it as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So what it does, it's really clever. It uses, it's mathematical, but mathematics comes from reincarnation. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So it can only be in growth or decline. Now, there's a thing in the universe called entropy. And entropy means that the universe is never static. Entropy, the analogy of entropy is, it's a science term, but I'll keep it simple because I love simple explanations. If you got a kettle and you boiled the kettle, so you turn it on and it boils up, the water in that is 100 degrees Celsius and it boils and it turns off. Now we'll just let the kettle sit there. What happens to the temperature of the water? Well, the temperature of the water, it doesn't cool down. What happens is the energy that was residing in that water that made it boil at 100 degrees, that energy, that heat, has dissipated in the atmosphere around that whole space. So the whole space, even though it's like in the kitchen's temperature has probably risen, say, 0.1 of a degree. So that energy has diminished, and through entropy, it's dissolved, the heat is dissolved and spread through that universe that surrounds the kettle. So the universe is in an entropy state all the time. If you put energy into any system and it heats up, because generally it heats up when you put energy into something, it will, or if it's no more energy is put into the system, the energy naturally drops and it dissipates. So this intelligence, this universal intelligence, understands this, and it says we must continue to grow. So if anything is left static, the energy will dissipate out of the system and basically just dissolve away. So everything must pursue growth for continuance. And this is what the human psyche. So instead of us as humans seeking to pursue growth and expansion of our consciousness, we confuse that with the physical dimension of, oh, we've got to make more money. Our property must increase in value. We must go on 15 holidays in the next 6 years. We must have more, rather than going internally and saying, true growth is something from within. And if we grow within, then that growth actually has a ripple effect up to the higher self, to that universal consciousness. So we pursue growth as humans a little bit out of kilter. We don't do it quite the right way, but let's just keep talking about this reincarnational process. So each of us are a part of this growth. So as we seek, as we go on our quest to learn more and more things about ourselves, we actually contribute to the growth and the evolution of unity, of oneness. So what oneness does in its intelligence, it knows that of itself, if it's just this sphere of consciousness with a certain restriction on its exposure, it knows that if it breaks off into smaller particles, smaller and smaller, it continues to divide like a fetus. The cells divide, replicate, and it continues to grow. It knows, the divinity knows that if it does that, it's going to gather more experience at a more efficient rate. So when we chunk down, we break down into smaller parts, and it's like cellular division. Experience occurs on the surface level of each one of these divisions. And the surface area of your experience, as it divides, the surface area of the entire sort of entity grows exponentially. So here's a metaphor, because in human terms, we're going to only give symbols. So here's unity, here's oneness. It knows that if it splits, as it splits, so the volume, so when we add the volume of these two smaller ones, it's equal to the volume of the larger one. So the volume hasn't changed. The volume has merely split. Then these two split, and there's 4. So each one of these is 25% volume of the primary sphere. Then as we do this by 10, we're going to have 1,000 particles. Now, each one of these 1,000 particles, when we add the volume together, the volume is the same. But what it's done is the surface area, when we've actually done this 10 times, that surface area, let's say that surface sphere area was a unit of 1. When we split it 1,000 times and the volume's still the same, the surface area has increased 1,000 times because of the mathematics. So this is what the higher self does. It, in its infinite genius, it has split itself into trillions and trillions of particles, of which our higher self is one of those particles. So you're one of these particles, I'm one of these particles, my cat's one of these particles, partner's one of these particles, our children's one of these particles. We all are from the original source, but then we're blessed with this beautiful thing called a lineage tree. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the lineage tree because maybe we're at 35 minutes. I might talk a little bit about it. So when we look at this as a computer model, it's actually logarithmic. So you can see here, so from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, it's a doubling, and then it doubles, doubles, doubles. So when we get to, after 10 divisions, the surface area has multiplied 1,000 times, but the total volume is the same. So this is how the higher self, in its genius, has the ability to gather more experience. Now, a metaphor that I love to use is this. Let's say we had this sphere and it's got a volume of 1 cubic meter, whatever size that is. So there's this sphere and we say, okay, we're going to task you with learning about, we want you to go outside, look at a tree, and you've got 3 minutes to look at a tree from as many angles as you can. And after 3 minutes, we want you to come back and write us a little report on that tree. So the sphere goes out and looks at the tree, looks at the roots and looks at the branches and has a look around. Comes back after 3 minutes. So it's a finite time. It writes a report, and the report's maybe 2 pages long. And it goes, I could have done better than that. So I'm going to break off into 100 equal particles. So the overall volume's the same, but the exposure has increased by 100-fold. So that now volume, as these individual particles, goes out to the tree, has 3 minutes again, but it can get into all the nooks and crannies and has a much broader overview. So when it comes back and it writes a report, it's a 5-page report because it can get more nuances, it can get more detail, it can get more data. So that's what we are. We are representatives of the oneness. We're representatives of unity. And our experience in this life is really to gather as much experience as possible. So when I go to the slide, so as we expand this out, so then each sphere, this is where it starts to accelerate, because you've got 1,000 small spheres here. They've all divided 10 times. They've divided 1,000 units. The volume's the same, but as each sphere gathers unique experiences, each volume grows marginally. So as the spheres reach out and gather experience, they actually grow in perception. And therefore, the entire volume grows even more. So not only does the surface experience grow through division, but also it grows as a collective by multiple experiences. So you and I are having this experience now in multiple dimensions, in your experience and in my experience. And that is contributing to the overall expansion of consciousness. So you're keeping with me? So then we go to the next part where the total overall experience and the volume grows. So this is the process of reincarnation from my perspective. Now, when we choose to come through as humans, let's go to the first point, thank you. When we choose to come through as humans, what happens is we have lessons that we choose. We choose our pathway in life. Well, at least that's my perception of things. So we're one of these unique particles. And this unique particle is tasked with doing 10 to 12 consecutive lifetimes through a lifetime pathway. And once those lifetimes are completed, all of that life experience, that evolutionary experience, goes back into and accumulates back to the higher self and allows it to expand. And then our uniqueness then evolves off into whatever the next dimension is. I haven't really pursued what the next dimension is. It's not really relevant because we're not there. So I might as well just focus on this life. Now, before we reincarnate into a life, into the next life, what we do is we say we want to learn certain things. We choose that, okay, in this particular life, I want to learn freedom. So how do we learn freedom? We learn freedom through being restricted. So we have a look at a potential next life and we say, okay, I want a childhood that is going to be diametrically opposite to what I want to learn. So in my training program, I actually talk about the 12 different lifetime pathways, because in reincarnation, because really numbers, numerology, all of these things, they're man-made constructs. They're not actually, they don't actually exist. Numbers don't actually exist. Like we can say that's 2, but it could be 5,000. It's just a man-made construct. Whereas where the construct has come from is the reincarnational patterns from one lifetime to the next, the transition to the next, and the transition to the next, and the transition to the next. And because we have that sort of embedded within us, we somehow deeply know that we're building one lifetime on top of another. That's how we sort of perceive numerology or numbers. So what we do is when we're coming into a particular life, where let's say that we've had 6 lives and we say, okay, the 7th life theme generally is this, we want to learn these things. But in order to learn these things, we need to have a childhood that is the opposite. So I feel that we choose a themed childhood that is going to test us, that is going to challenge us, that is going to endeavor to restrict us in some way. So as we're forced to learn. In, say, for example, in my childhood was that I was actually, while I get on well with my mum now, when I was up to the age of 20, my mother really was completely indifferent towards me. There was no relationship. There was no love shown. It was like, if I was there or wasn't there, it's like it didn't really matter to her. So in that being, in my life experience as a child, was this indifference that was shown towards me, this lack of love that was shown towards me. I developed love of self. I developed self-resilience. I developed independence. I developed power, personal power, not power over other people, but personal power. So what I did was I extracted the restrictions and limitations and the blockages to tools of empowerment that have really empowered me through my life. So I feel that I chose my parents for those reasons. They're not, my parents aren't particularly intelligent people. So I had to work through that process as well, because I can articulate myself very well, whereas they can't. I can confront emotions really well, whereas they can't. So they were diametrically opposite to the lessons that I wanted to learn. And I feel reincarnationally, this is intentional. So when I do mentoring with people, I'm helping them to realize this, to turn those challenges from childhood into powerful tools of self-expression. Then we choose the time of our human condition, as in we look at the, like right now we're in Australia in 2022. So I reincarnated in the 60s. So I looked, you know, we get a snapshot. What happens in terms of reincarnation, from what I've been taught and what I've observed, is that when there's a conception energy between a male and female energy, when the spermatozoa sort of fertilizes the egg, there's a spark of consciousness, and there is a synopsis of the first 13 years of growth of that child, and that's sent into the spirit world or wherever that place is. And when we're up there waiting for a reincarnation, this spark of conception energy comes and says, oh, look, here's a really good potential match here. These restrictions and limitations are going to balance up with your lessons that you want to acquire. How about it? You go, yeah, I'm up for it. I'm going to choose that. And those choices in that synopsis of the first 13 years incorporated are the human condition of the evolution of the planet, the country, the culture, the parents and the siblings, and the social conditions. I feel that we choose all of these scenarios. And then you've got the lifetime number, which is a consideration which is blended into all this as well. Is so you might be towards the end of your reincarnational cycle, you might be in lifetime 9, 10 or 11, and you're going to express some sort of magnificence. You're going to access your divinity. Now, to sort of address that question from before, not to, like, I can't judge my parents. Like I said, they're not, you know, they're average people, but they can't think beyond tomorrow. They don't have a sense of vision or purpose. And I had a look at their lifetime numbers. I use the word numbers because that's our brain references numbers. And they're probably about sixth lifetime. They're in their sixth lifetime. So they're not seeking to quest. They're not seeking to understand the nature of their spiritual evolution. They're happy just to work 40 to 45 years and do a job and get super and, you know, go on a holiday once a year, because that's their particular framework of evolution. And that's for them to experience. You know, even, you know, you look at royalty, for example, you know, from one perspective, you say, wow, you know, they're doing so well because it's all, they've got all this notoriety. But then you look at another part of their evolution and they're totally restricted. They have to do what they're told. They have to be compliant. Like, wow, if you want karma, there's karma for you. So every evolution has strengths and weaknesses. Where do you choose to focus? Do you choose to focus on the strengths or the weaknesses and vulnerabilities? I choose the strengths. That's just for me, and it works. I always find myself in the right place at the right time, in the right frame of mind. It's just one of those magical things. So there's the reincarnational cycle, and then my feeling is the whole goal of reincarnation is to go beyond, consciously go beyond all choices and all conditioning, and to have a maximum life experience. So in our life, we work towards a maximum life experience. Doesn't mean we go and do drugs, and it doesn't mean we, you know, have to jump out of a perfectly good aeroplane with some piece of fabric on our shoulders. What it means is that each moment of our existence, we celebrate it in some form. We say, this is me right now. I eat this food and I celebrate the flavors of this food, the texture in my hand, the smell, the taste, what it looks like, what it sounds like, if it has a sound when I crunch it. Celebrating the universality of the now moment, for me, is the most powerful path of reincarnation there is, and the most powerful part of this journey as a human. Worrying about tomorrow, honestly, who gives a shit? What happened yesterday? Well, it happened yesterday. I just accept that, okay, I had that little bingle in the car. Bugger. All right. I wasn't concentrating. Okay, I accept responsibility. I wasn't concentrating. I caused the bingle, so I got to pay for it. All right then. Well, I made a mistake. Because if we don't make mistakes, if we're not making mistakes, we're not growing, or we're not attempting to grow. If we're not making mistakes, we're static. So when energy's static, it goes into decline. So we have to get ourselves out there. We have to be progressive. We have to be, essentially working to grow and move forward. So beliefs and conditioning limit our experience, but the reality is they don't have to. We can be aware of them and they can come forward and they can come into our mind, and then we can just ignore them. Now, we did briefly off recording, we talked about karma. So I'm going to introduce my concept of karma, which may be of benefit to you to understand. Because for me, karma is a powerful thing. Karma is not negative at all. It's a really powerful journey. So karma, in terms of Hinduism and Buddhism, says it's the sum of a person's actions in this and previous states of existence, viewed as deciding their fate in future existences. That's the traditional meaning of karma or understanding of karma, but I see it differently. I see that the first level is past life karma. And this is just lessons that were not completed in other lives. So remember I mentioned before that we choose lessons before we reincarnate, and we reincarnate, so we get 90% of it done, you beaut, but there's a residual amount that we didn't complete. So we say, all right, in the next life, I've got this 5% I've got to complete from the previous life, and then the theme of this next lifetime is going to be XYZ. I'm going to complete this. So it's blended in. It's a part of what we do. So past life karma does exist, but it's not 1,000%. It's 5%. The next form of karma is our family life karma, like our parents, our siblings, immediate family. That having that experience with them, that's a part of our conditioning. So that's about 5%. And I'll talk more about the 5% in a second. Then there's planetary karma. So this is the time of the Earth plane at the moment, the evolution of human evolution, where media is really like the technology. We're in a technology evolution at the moment, and we're moving into the AI evolution, which is, that's just going to be crazy. The AI evolution, I'm just not going to participate in that game. Sorry, but I'll observe it and I'll see it, but it ain't for me. I love to engage with humans. I don't like this artificial stuff. But right now, we're having a really interesting transition from the technology revolution into the AI revolution, and this is about 5% of our karma as well. The next one is social influence, which is the collective unconscious, which is the flow of expectations. And this challenges our autonomy, and that's about 5%. So all of those four there, which most people believe is the sum total of all of our karma, people become very enveloped in, oh my God, my karma, it must have been something I did in a past life, or I did or it's my parents' fault, or, it's like, yeah, it's 20%. So just go, stuff it. I'm not going to be affected by that at all. But what's going to blow you away is what I feel is the major karma. And it's like the car accident I mentioned before. It's immediate karma, where you don't watch where you're walking and you trip over and you land on your knee and you scuff your knee. That's 80%. So, the old Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, is that the bulk of our karma comes from not concentrating, not being present, not being aware of our environment, and not being centered, being off, thinking about something else and being distracted, and then all of a sudden, oh, you drop your dinner plate, you didn't put it on the kitchen sink properly, and it drops off and smashes on the kitchen floor because you weren't being fully present and observing what you're doing. And people constantly, they marvel at how I observe things. They say, you just see everything. I say, yeah, because I'm aware, I'm present. It's just become aware. Just see what that person's, look at the energy of that person and be aware of what that person's doing, and you can interpret and anticipate what they're doing. So karma is actually not as bad as what we've been led to believe by all the mystics and the gurus. 80% of it is instant karma. So when our experience has completed as a human, as we've done the 10 to 12 lifetimes, because like reincarnation is a concept. It's something that we somehow intrinsically know when we're getting at the end of our reincarnational cycle. People who are halfway through the reincarnational cycle, this is not even a question that comes up in their mind. That's like, it's like, what? Are you a Hindu or something? They're not even considering it. But when we get close to the end of our reincarnational cycle, we then start to explore it and start to understand it. And so that's the nature of this conversation. So what happens when we get towards the end of the reincarnational cycle and we've completed all of our experiences, the body has exhausted itself, all of our experiences evolve back to oneness. And because we've been blessed with uniqueness, but we are here of service for oneness, for unity. So my opinion is that no experience is ever wasted, but lack of experience is the waste. Just think about that. Lack of experience is a waste. If you're not truly experiencing life, what a waste. It's not a waste of time, it's not a waste of space, but it's a waste of evolution for you. It's a waste of your service to your higher self, to oneness and to unity. So my encouragement is, don't waste another moment. Get cracking. But even if you get cracking slow, it's better than getting cracking slow is better than not getting cracking at all. So live your best life. Live from your highest purpose, whatever that highest purpose is. Really have that sense of, I'm going to live this moment. And even while we're in this presentation now, I feel I'm living my best moment right now. And you might choose that you participating in this conversation of energy, in this sharing of concepts, that you're living your best, highest moment too. So every moment to me is to be sort of almost cherished, not worshipped, but maybe worshipped, but really highly valued and really regarded. So there's a very strong sense of value. Strong sense of value is probably how I would. There's other words there. Let me see if I can tune into those other words. Well, the other word is knowing. This real sense of knowing that none of this is futile. This human experience that I'm having is totally valuable, is totally worthwhile. And this work in 12 months' time, I might be speaking to 200 people. If it's one person, I don't mind, because this is my growth. This is my experience. This is like my inner genius that fulfills me. I love setting up this little studio and putting the lights up. It's a lot of fun. I love it. And testing the audio and the cameras beforehand. And I still make mistakes, but that's a part of the learning process. You only get better by doing something, by experiencing it, by gathering experiences. So that's me. That's my perception of reincarnation. Have you got any questions or any contributions to the conversation?
I guess you knew that you lost me for a little bit there with the whole particle sort of breaking off in the volume. And then had to look at it from a different perspective, where I was still seeing it from my view as singular rather than a whole. And then it sort of made sense, and I'm like, okay, it's connection, we're all connected. Yeah, so then I got it. But then with I feel like we pick our family. You did mention that, but then, yeah, I feel like we actually pick our family, and then we are living, I think, thousands of lives. And then through those thousands of lives, we probably started off as a rock, and then developed throughout the many lifetimes. And then we go through the levels. Yeah.
Yep, good insight. Awesome insight. And that's when you get into pure metaphysics. That's one of the challenges, that when we start to, if we can isolate ourselves from the concept of our self-importance, and we can recognize that we do have this spark of uniqueness and genius, but we are representing the higher self, if you like, or oneness or unity, but we're blessed with the uniqueness of thought around that expression. So it's not like I toiled about this concept for about a decade. That's a long time to pose. I toiled with it from the point of view of, am I merely a string puppet to the higher self, to this oneness, to this unity? And I was asking the wrong question. For me, I was asking the wrong question. It was, no, I am an ambassador of the higher self. I am a representative of unity, of oneness. And as soon as I made that flip, which was middle of last year, I realized everything dropped. Ego, a lot of my ego fabric dropped, because I know that I know that the person talking here appears to be this thing called Stephen, but I know that it's this higher essence of energy that is talking about this, that is bringing through the creative expression of what this idea or what this concept is. So when I got over that hurdle of recognizing, no, I wasn't merely a puppet, but that I was contributing to the whole, then everything shifted for me. So I'm glad you you saw that distinction when I explained that.
I'm sorry about your car. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's all right. It's one of those things where when you build your intuition up and it's just immediately like, okay, pay attention. And it's like, no, pay attention. And you only get it, I get it twice now. I get the strong message twice, and then the thing happens and it's like, oh, I got the message.
Yeah.
Why didn't I listen? And it's,
yeah.
then it's like, oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. I think, when I see the number, when we were talking about the numbers that I see, sometimes I'm like, what does this mean? Like, thank you for the numbers. Maybe sometimes it means, all right, get your head back in the game, bring yourself back, awareness, be here in the moment. Like, okay. And it's like, like how you were talking, I think sometimes I'm fixated on the purpose thing, and then I'm just stagnant.
It's okay to be fixated on purpose, because at least you're on a quest. See, that the Holy Grail from the Knights of the Round Table, the symbology of the Grail, when they go out to search for the Grail, they're asking a question. They're seeking knowledge. They're seeking self-awareness. So the fact that you're asking a question and you're pursuing this thing called purpose, that's awesome. It's brilliant, because you're going to transform yourself by that quest. So what you I'm not going to tell you what your quest or, not to quest or whatever. But for me, what I've discovered is, because I was doing that too, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? My metaphysical teacher said that the worst statement you can say to yourself is, who am I? What am I doing here? And where am I going? Metaphysically, that is the worst thing you can do, because it traps you in time. It doesn't trap you in space, it traps you in time. A better question to ask is, just do your work through me. All the ancient seers did it. They still do it. Mother Teresa did it. She said, okay, God, just speak through me and I'll heal these people. She was a messenger of oneness. These people that we look to, when you look at them, they have accepted that they are ambassadors of the higher source, of higher energy, and they've let go of their ego. And as a result, they move mountains.
Yeah.
They enlist support, yes, but people willingly want to support them and be involved. They don't know why, they just want to participate and they want to be involved. So starting to search for your purpose is a very powerful stepping stone towards transcendence, for sure. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming along tonight. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I love this stuff. So in two weeks' time, I'm going to be doing a very interesting meetup presentation. I might market that one a bit more. It's a meetup presentation about how to read people's face shapes. And by reading people's face shapes, you can actually begin to interpret their physical personality types. So what it does is it assists your ability to be aware about people and where they're coming from. I do it. I've trained myself. I learned from a master of this. He's now left the earth plane. So I've now been tasked to share his material over the next 5 years. So this will be my very first public presentation of the material. And it will help me to articulate my thoughts around it. Like I live it and breathe it, and I'm very, very good at it. But to be able to break it down into a PowerPoint presentation and a Zoom presentation, so it's like transferable skills, that's going to test me. So tune in for that one. So I look forward to preparing for that. The preparation is always a lot of fun as well. But having said all that, we're finished for tonight. So thank you so much for attending. If you do have any questions, just pop me an email or go to the website. I think what I'll do is I'll just in the chat box there, or just put in, yes, I'm on the right one. Just in the chat box there, that's the list of the upcoming presentations. So if you do have any further questions, click on that, and then you just find the email address somewhere on the website, and we can go for there. But thanks so much for joining in tonight, and see you again next time.
Looking forward to it. Thanks. Good night. Bye.